the HRW webinar, Information in, Influence Out. Thank you for joining us. It's great to have so many people attending. Before we begin, here are a couple of housekeeping points. Audiocast quality is subject to your equipment, available bandwidth, and in traffic. If you experience unsatisfactory audio quality, please use the telephone dial-in option provided in your confirmation and reminder emails. If you have dialed in, operator assistance is available by pressing #. During the webinar, we'll be showing a couple of short videos, and if you've dialed in, please note that you can only listen to them through your computer's speakers. You may send questions at any time by using the Q&A window located on the lower left of the presentation screen. Just type your question at the bottom of the Q&A window and click the Ask button with your mouse to send it. A question and answer session will follow the presentation. Now I'm handing it over to Sonia from HRW to introduce the speakers. Go ahead, Sonia.
Many thanks, Luke. So my name is Sonia Berra. I am Marketing Assistant at HRW and your day. So being diagnosed with a chronic, rare or invisible disease can be an isolating and stressful process. And the variable availability of and access to reliable information adds to this challenge. However, the landscape is changing with the increasing role and influence of individual patients on communities online. In today's session, we will share the results of our self-funded study into patient influences in rare and invisible diseases, taking you through our approach, learnings, and insights into these fascinating ecosystems. Your presenters today are Katie Irving. Katie is the Global Head of Behavioral Science and founder of HRW Shift, HRW's internal behavioral science team. She worked on this study looking at the gaps between what people say and what they do, and what we can learn from that. Then we have Emily Glass, a senior research executive at HRW, who worked closely with Katie on this project, conducting interviews and analyzing data. Emily is also a member of the HRW Oncology Specialist Team Orbit and cares about the patient information seeking challenges in rare cancers. Then we have Lucy Wates. Lucy was diagnosed with chronic migraine and contributed significantly to this study by both participating in the research but also contributing to the analysis, sharing her personal experiences and reflecting on her role as a patient influencer. Then last but not least, we have Joe Mason. Joe is Senior Vice President at RealityMine, the technology company, and he will be telling us about the capabilities of the technology his company provided for this study. I'll now hand over to you, Katie.
Thank you, Sonia. We wanted to start this discussion by asking a really open question, which is that every day we're coming in contact with other people, but how much do we really know about what other people are going through? And this is particularly the case in cases of rare disease or invisible illness. And rare disease is any condition that occurs in less than 1 in 10 people in the U.S. Rare disease accounts for nearly 1 in 10 people, but in and of itself, it is an incredibly rare condition. And invisible illness is an umbrella term for any medical condition that isn't easily visible to others. So chronic physical conditions like arthritis, diabetes, fibromyalgia, but also mental illnesses. And living with an invisible illness often leads to judgment and criticism because others believe that you look fine on the outside, so you might be making up your suffering. And rare disease and invisible illness have a couple of things in common, which is that those that suffer from these conditions can often feel loneliness and isolation. They find it difficult to find other people who maybe have gone through similar experiences. Also, there's less treatment options available. Although in the U.S., rare disease affects nearly 30 million people, there are less than 5% of those diseases that have an FDA-approved treatment. And particularly when it comes to finding information and support for their conditions, it can be a huge rabbit hole of information, extended and difficult process seeking multiple complex and out-of-date media sources and online and offline channels. And in this environment, people with rare and invisible conditions often find themselves taking to the internet and encountering what are called patient influencers. And patient influencers are people who have taken to the internet to express their experience with their condition, to tell their stories, to share information and share experiences about their treatment. And patient influencers play a really central role in spreading information and making connections to form community. But we wondered, where do these kids get their information from? How does the variability of their day-to-day experience impact what they communicate? And once they've posted, where does that information go? So to explore this a little bit further, we conducted a self-funded study looking at the flow of information in the patient influencer ecosystem. So asking, where do patient influencers go to get information? How do they process that information through the lens of their own experience? And then how do they decide what to post and why? In order to answer this question, we took a multifaceted methodology that covered multiple elements of the patient influencer experience. So over the course of a month, we engaged 10 patient influencers, and we began with a 30-minute introductory depth interview where we helped them get on board with the methodology and introduce them to the aims of the study and understood a little bit of a baseline about their experience. Critically, we then deployed the passive media metering technology, which I'll hand over to Joe to talk about in just a second. But this is a really novel approach that allowed us to monitor in real time their information-seeking behaviors and really where they, what they did on their digital devices and where they went to find information. Over the course of the month, we also had a couple of touch points with them where we checked in on just a 15-minute telephone depth interview. And we also asked them to kind of give us a little bit of context to their information seeking as it happened within the moment video and audio diary. So they made just entries on their mobile phone that would give us a little bit of the offline context to their online behaviors. And then at the end of the month, we finished up with a nice depth interview where we could really get their reflective perspective on and their ups and downs over the course of the month and compare and contrast with how that stood against their in-the-moment and behavioral data sources. So I'll hand over to Joe to tell you just a little bit more about the technology that we deployed with RealityMine.
Thank you, Katie. So what is passive metering and sort of how does it work is a question we get very often. RealityMine, being the leaders in the industry since 2012, really believe passive metering for the frictionless experience it has for the person who is being monitored. So we really employ a best-in-class technology that will sit on the user's either mobile device, laptop, or tablet for a duration of time with all permission-based data being fully GDPR compliant for the extended amount of time. And then at the close of the project, usually the panelist is provided with an incentive. So we will be through an invite, say, panelists, would you like to participate for 4 weeks in this case? Please install this technology, usually about a 4 to 6 step process, depending on the device, to the user's mobile or tablet or desktop. And then we let them know when activation has begun with minimum invasiveness on their battery or user experience. There we go. And then during this time, which type of data is collected? It really depends on the project and the goals of the project. We have the capability to go from anywhere from shopping behavior in app, for instance, like Amazon and Walmart in the States, websites visited, geolocation. It is a tremendous amount of data, so really, again, we'll clean, categorize it, and that is the gold standard of what our technology does, and then deliver a panelist ID with a device ID and the information being requested during this time, cleaned, categorized, everything in what people do, and then people like Katie and data scientist teams at HRW are able to put what around it. Back to you, Katie.
So now I'm going to walk you through what we discovered using this methodology in a little bit more detail. So overall, we found that attention is so fragmented within the digital Within a day, people will typically jump from social media to sites to email and back again. And you can see on screen here that on average, participants spent just 113.6 seconds on any one site or app on average. And even when it comes to Google browsing, people average of just 137.6 seconds. Social networking, slightly more, but health even less at just 58.8 seconds. Over the course of 1 month, we captured 55,749 digital events, which further shows just how many interactions individuals have and just how fragmented they could be. And overall, 46% of those digital events lasted less than 10 seconds and 58% lasted less than 30.
Yeah, and actually from the patient perspective, I'm really surprised at how quick digital events are. In a way, it makes, because personally, I often browse Instagram or Facebook at various stolen moments throughout the day. For example, when I'm traveling, it shows how much information really needs to stand out and communicate its message very quickly. So this shows us that it's key that information is attention grabbing and clear, because there won't be a lot of time to absorb it.
This slide helps illustrate this idea of fragmentation even further. So we can see from the use, most of life is taken up with other things. So communication, social networking, internet, music, and productivity. But really, social networking occupies just a tiny proportion of our time online. And within that, health also only plays a smaller part. So when it comes to searches, we found that these are incredibly event-driven. So on this slide, you can see that search terms within one sitting will follow a similar or the same theme. So you can see, for example, on the top left-hand side, that at 12:21 p.m., this particular respondent was prompted to search for assistant dogs and conducted 3 searches for this. At 20:54, they were then prompted to search for health-related topics. So you can see that they searched Google for a few miles or how many calories burned or 11 stones into pounds. So this is really just, again, reinforcing that upon prompting, individuals spend just a short amount of time searching for the information that they might need to know or want to know before moving on to something else. And back over to Katie.
Excellent. So, yeah, as Emily mentioned, and as Lucy mentioned as well, this really tells us how important it is. We have such a short window with which to connect with people. We also found when we delved into this really rich pile of data, behavioral and experiential data that we captured, some really powerful human stories as well. And for that, we'd just like to highlight 2 of the patient influencers that we had participating in our study and talk through a little bit of the stories that we found within their data. And to begin with, I'd like to introduce you to Ellie. Ellie is a patient influencer, the founder of the Foundation for Non-Ketotic Hyperglycinemia. She is a full-time carer for her 2-year-old son who has a terminal metabolic glycemic metabolism disorder, which is non-ketotic hyperglycinemia, or NKH. And she is a online patient influencer. She's also the NKH International Family Network Chair and a charity children's book author. And I'll let Ellie's perspective on her the reasons for posting speak for itself in a video.
I post so that people know Kai, so that when we fundraise, people know him and help.
Yeah.
I want him to be known. I want him to make a mark on the world, but I also want our community to support us in the one way that we need, which is to fundraise an NKH cure. Yeah. Right? And people are only going to donate or come to events or buy my books if they know and care for us. Mm-hmm. And they can't know and care for us if we're silent.
So when we looked at Ellie's data, we were able to see it evolving. So here's just an example of how we can see from the way that she uses social media and the data that we capture about her information-seeking behaviors and the offline data we capture about how she spent time that day, give us a really clear picture that healthcare itself doesn't exist within a silo. It's just a single part of everyday life. So here's an example of, in the morning, she shared a Instagram story of how she was blending up a blended breakfast for her son. And then she shared a rant about how the company had introduced a new bottle adapter and it impacted the air intake, and that this was having really intense downstream consequences for her. And we've just included a small snippet of this rant, but it really was a rant. I mean, she really posted several pages about her frustration with this situation that was affecting her role as a carer. And what was interesting about this is that we were able to look at her posts and see this rant happen. But then when we looked behind the scenes at her browsing data, we saw that actually immediately after posting this rant, she went on a bunch of searches, searching for things like movie stars confessions, carpool karaoke, L videos, interviews with celebrities, which we can really clearly now relate to her post and her frustration and her rant as just an attempt at some light relief, an attempt to kind of wash this unhappy situation out of her mind. And after that, we saw her then delve into work and wedding. So we could see her then get on with the other important aspects of her daily life. So we can see how frustration with a health element can lead to the need to find some light relief, what that looked like in the digital space, and then the work that she then went on to do. And also when we looked at Ellie's data, when we aggregated it over time, looked at her consistent daily patterns, we were able to actually see that her daily media consumption had some real patterns. And this was something that when we spoke with her at the end of the month, she also recognized in herself, although was surprised to see just how consistently she was doing it. But she typically consumes more kind of LinkedIn and Facebook in the mornings, and then Instagram more in the evening. And it was really interesting to watch how pretty consistently those were the timings of her consumption of those different media. So those are the spaces where you can find Ellie in an average day. And we can also see, as Joe alluded to, how information consumption can potentially lead to purchases. And in Ellie's example, she went into notes at 1:08 in the afternoon, presumably to look at something that she'd spoken about in face-to-face communication with a healthcare professional, because immediately after that she Googles Friedenkreis-type table and then goes on to start looking at Friedenkreis resources, which is a specialized type of massage table, goes into Amazon, comes back to the internet, goes to a particular website, Cryomed, and she spends a little bit of time looking at a calendar and at cakes, presumably for a birthday cake delivery, which she recounted to us in her media diary. But then she comes back on track, and she comes back to the massage table search, and we can see the way that she bounces from Google searching to purchasing platforms and particular vendors before actually spending 30 seconds checking out at Amazon, looking at different types of tables. And it was interesting when we talked with Ellie about these patterns as well, because she actually recounted to us how some other data that we picked up from her having to do with the delivery company, and lots of searches for a delivery company were due to a problematic delivery of this particular massage table. So we can really see the way that particular behaviors, purchase decisions unfold in real time. Another thing that we found quite interesting when we looked at Ellie's tendencies versus her media consumption was that actually throughout the month, Ellie did spend a lot of time looking at social media. She was on Facebook, she was on Instagram, she was on Twitter a little bit, but during this particular month, she didn't actually do very much posting. Like I said, she posted a couple of stories, but she only had 3 Instagram posts in the whole of the month. And we thought, this could be passive media consumption. We've all been there with our passively consuming media. It could be that she's time and community specific, or it could be that she's doing something like building her network on those channels and not necessarily posting.
Yeah, I think looking at this from my perspective as a patient influencer, it feels like the fact that she's only posted on Instagram 3 times, it isn't a sign that she's not an influencer. Posting in itself isn't the only way of influencing. One can influence others through a variety of channels, such as commenting on posts, replying to direct individual messages on Instagram, Facebook or Twitter, replying to comments on Facebook groups, meeting face-to-face, messaging on other apps like WhatsApp or Viber, or even Skype, or on the phone. I've actually spoken to a fair few of my followers. I've even met people in person, and we just discuss and share what we're going through. So we mustn't associate influencing only with posting information. The wider context definitely needs to be acknowledged.
There's another thing that was going on that we kind of discovered in our final interview with Ellie in her home, which is that social media analysis on its own only really tells us part of the story. It doesn't account for the offline ups and downs. And I'll let Ellie recount it herself in this video.
So constantly being told that my baby's going to die makes me just, one, emotionally precious, but also my baby's going to die. How do I manage that? Like, that's inconceivable.
Yeah.
So I just feel like there's no future.
Yeah.
Well, there's no happy future. There's no future that I want. Because either my baby is disabled or suffering or he's dead. None of those options are amazing. I don't know. I've been trying to be more active. I've been trying to talk to people, be less isolated. But the thing is that when I'm down, I'm in that hole.
Yeah.
I took a big break. So I was in a bigger hole over Christmas.
I remember you saying.
Which was rubbish. And over Christmas, I was just like, just stop doing anything you don't want to do.
Yeah.
But that grew the hole. It didn't shrink the hole. Because then I just got more and more entrenched in my own little world and in my grief. And I got more and more isolated. And then, so one of the things that I did miss was posting. But a lot of it, I felt guilty, not because I posted. The more people that know of it, the less rare it gets.
Yeah.
So next we have our second patient influencer. So as Katie has just done for Ellie, I'm going to walk you through some of the key findings and insights that we gathered from analysing some of Lucy's browsing data. It's great that we also have obviously Lucy on the line with us, so she'll be able to see them from her own perspective as we go along. So Lucy is our invisible illness chronic migraine sufferer who's chosen to post to help build community whilst using her own scientific background to really help others navigate emerging information on treatment developments. It's great that we've had her online today, as I say, to see them from the patient perspective. So I'm going to briefly hand over to Lucy to give herself another little introduction before we go.
Yeah, so I'd like to talk through just my main reason for posting really is just to connect people. So I had to quit work about a year ago. At the time, I just felt so alone because I really thought I was the only one in the world who had to quit work because of this strange condition and symptoms, just didn't understand. And so all it takes is, for one other person to say, yes, I've got this too, to show me that I'm not alone. So I decided to, go on Instagram. I found, a lot of mutual friends on there who understood what I was going through. So it's really about connecting with other people, but also wanting them not to feel so alone. There's new accounts every single day created by people with these very mysterious symptoms, because migraine is a very mysterious condition. And they just feel really alone, as well as I did at the start. So I just want to show them how I've dealt with the same things they're going through, in order to help in any way I can.
So here we can start to at how Lucy's posts were emerging and what their true origins were. So you can see on this particular slide that before Lucy went to bed on a particular night at around 10:15 p.m., she spent some time browsing various sites and browsing the internet. There's been a quiet period before she woke up at around 4:33 a.m. and used her clock application on her phone. There's another quiet period where Lucy must have fallen back asleep before waking up again at 7:35, where her browsing really starts to pick up again. And obviously this sort of wake up at 4:33 a.m. meant that she had a really disturbed and a shorter night's sleep as well. And interestingly, when then cross-referencing that with her Instagram posts, and her social media posts, it's actually the very next day Lucy posted this post that's just popped up here about rest.
Yeah, it's really fascinating actually to have one's data analysed. So here's an example showing the root of a particular post. If I had been asked in hindsight why I posted the image that day, probably, I probably wouldn't have been able to remember why. But when it was shocked to me that I'd been restless the night before, it was like being able to actually understand myself a bit more and realise that I had actually been really tired that day. So the fact that we can see the rationale or the root behind a specific post and the respondent themselves wouldn't even have recalled why, that's the power of this methodology.
So here we can see a slightly different origin story for a post. So on this particular occasion, Lucy checked an email that she received from the Migraine Summit just before 5:30 on the 3rd of March. This then triggered a switch to Google Chrome, where she then navigates to the Migraine Summit website. And from that point, she quickly switches to Vimeo, where there are some videos of the summit, before then navigating just a couple of minutes later. What's even more interesting to see on this is that the content Lucy viewed on the 3rd of March must have been really memorable and really stuck with her, despite only the 2 or 3 minutes she spent browsing those particular sites. That's because that on the 6th of March, we then really see that she actually revisits the Migraine Summit website again, watches a few more videos before then switching to social media sites. Lucy then actually goes on to post another picture on her Instagram that summarises some interesting migraine facts for her followers, again just reinforcing that idea that the content really resonated with her and stuck in her mind. So here we can see Lucy's social media consumption patterns over, and interestingly we see that sometimes she's consuming a lot and posting, sometimes just posting, and sometimes only consuming. So sort of reinforcing the fact that consumption and posting doesn't always correlate.
Yeah, so yeah, again, let's not solely link posting to influencing. It's actually quite tiring to create a post, especially with an illness. It's something to bear in mind. So the next best thing to that is to interact with my followers, but through other means. So again, the wider sphere of influence really does need to be acknowledged because it isn't just about posting. Another important thing to take into account, I personally get inspired through other posts. So, we know that creativity breeds creativity. That may not necessarily link to the time that I post, as we can see here. So very often I actually take a screenshot or make a note of something to post about later. So again, we shouldn't solely seek a direct link between time of usage of online media or posting.
We also observed a specifically interesting pattern with Lucy as well, in that she regularly spent time on social media just before posting. But she was also more likely to consume Spotify, Netflix, and also YouTube before posting as well. And this is really just highlighting, again, that there could be some external factors or events that are driving posting that's not just purely social media driven, which also was interesting to explore in some of the interviews as well.
Yeah, so it's another rare opportunity here to compare how my media usage influences what I post. So when I was first shown this slide, I recalled that it had been a very positive month for me symptom-wise, and I had created a very kind of motivational Spotify playlist and watched a lot of comedies on Netflix. So I had surrounded myself in positivity, and looking back, clearly that helped to influence my mostly positive posts.
So what are some takeaways that we can consider for other types of research and the next time we approach media channel research like this? Well, the first thing is a couple of takeaways about media tracing methods in general. And these are just considerations that anyone should be bearing in mind when looking to track media usage passively using methods like RealityMine. The first is that a lot of our participants, and indeed lots of people who hear about this methodology, the first thing that comes to mind is the concern that it's going to feel like Big Brother, that you're going to feel like you're being watched and that you're going to behave differently because you're being observed. And I would say that that is obviously the most important consideration when thinking about methods like this. You need to be incredibly transparent about the intentions for the data, the nature of the data that you're capturing. But we also were pleasantly surprised by how willing our participants were to install the software and give us their browsing data. as part of the study, and every single participant that we spoke with said they definitely thought about it a lot, particularly at the beginning, and that they definitely, although very few admitted to changing their behavior, they thought about being watched, but they also all said that over time they forgot that it was there and kind of reverted to the norm. So it really is the important thing to bear in mind, is giving it an embedding period to allow that behavior to revert to normal. The second consideration, and Joe alluded to this, as did Emily, with the kind of volume of events that we captured, is just the sheer volume of data that this type of methodology generates. And it's a double-edged sword, because it's really magical to see the volume of interactions that people have in the digital. But also, with any research study, you're only going to be interested in particular interactions, and there's a lot of data that are generated. It's the particular time, it's the location, it's the website, it's the duration of the visit, it's the type of device that they were using. And every single day we got an output from RealityMine that included their digital browsing data, their media consumption data, and their app usage data. And we had to merge those files and then perform science on them. So it's definitely a consideration to bear in mind, and make sure that you have the capabilities to analyze that, as well as the time to do so. The third point is really just giving context to the behavioral results that you're seeing come through. So again, we can see everything that is happening in the digital space for our participants. We don't always know why. We don't know what they're looking for. We don't know whether they found what they're looking for and they stopped browsing because of that, or whether they got frustrated and gave up. So using complementary methodologies like video diaries, audio diaries, some form of contextualization that we can offer our participants helps us to make better sense of those data. But of course, it's worth bearing in mind that whenever you use a complementary methodology like that, you're potentially reminding participants participating in this study as well, so drawing more attention to their digital behaviors, which, depending on the nature of the behavior you're after, could be inhibiting their likelihood of engaging in those behaviors. And the final consideration with media tracking methodologies is just making sure that you're hitting the right time in the journey. With our patient influencers, they were all later on past their diagnosis, and so their actual information seeking about their condition was a lot less than it would have been if we'd got them right at the point of diagnosis, when they're at their most vulnerable, at their most hungry for information. So trying to make sure that you capture people in the moments at the right time journey to actually observe those information seeking or shopping behaviors as they happen is really critical. And we can compensate for that by asking them to reenact or pretend that they're searching for, give tasks to do. But again, it introduces a degree of artificiality that can be problematic. Our overall takeaways, though, thinking about what we learned on this journey of this study that we can apply right away, is basically just that not necessarily aware of just how sporadic their attention is. And just relying on recollection alone, this is a huge proportion of the information consumption picture. So using methods like RealityMine to collect actual browsing data is just potentially revolutionary, and really is filling a gap between what we typically would do to understand media consumption and what is actually possible with these types of methods, bridging that gap between what people say and what they actually do. The second point is that, mood and emotion and headspace and logistics really vary over time. And we know from behavioral science that these affect the way that people actually process information. So using the types of data that we can capture through methods like RealityMine help us to account for that context and infer mood by looking at what media they're browsing, what kind of videos they're looking at, what kind of music they're listening to, and trying to account for what we can understand about their context and mood through other methods, not only their information consumption data. And finally, patient influencers, like anybody, process information through the lens of their own experience, and that's what makes them so powerful and so influential for other patients. So relying on just the post alone just really isn't an option. You need to understand the person behind the post to really account for how they're processing the information that they collect and how they're then posting it in a way that makes an impact on the wider community. So that's our story. If there are any questions, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A.
Thank you so much to all our presenters, Katie, Lucy, Emily, and Joe, for a really interesting and informative session. As Katie just said, if you'd like to post any questions, please put them in the Q&A box on your screen. While we're waiting, there have actually been two that came through earlier. I'll just put them to you, to our presenters. The first one is, when would this RealityMine approach best?
That's a good...
Go ahead, Katie.
Sorry, Joe. I was just going to say, like, in terms of timing from a kind of research objective perspective, it works really well when you've got behaviors that are quite common. It's like when you're looking about where do patients look for information or support, or what types of apps do physicians use, broader questions that relate to digital behaviors that happen frequently enough that you'll definitely capture them in the time period of your research study. So really understanding what channels to use to access different stakeholders is a great objective. Yeah, and that's kind of how I'd answer that question. Sorry, Joe, I slightly interrupted you. I don't know if you have another answer about or more to add on when it
No,
was
likewise, I think that's perfect, especially in the healthcare space, dealing with smaller sample sizes. You hit it right on the head.
Okay, thank you. And the other question I have here is, how long should it be field for?
Yeah, and this is another good question. And this is often a limit that we face when we're considering these types of methodologies, because as we've just talked about, you need to give it a little bit of time to bed in so that people aren't so conscious of the fact that they are being monitored, so that their information seeking and digital behaviors kind of revert to norm. But at the same time, we need to be pragmatic about the objectives and the needs. So, I mean, there's no kind of limit to the amount of time it can be in field for. It's just a reminder that every single day we're generating thousands of data points that we then need to be able to sort through. So it really depends on the nature of the business challenge that you're looking to address and how frequently that's likely to happen. So as long as we can account for the bedding in period and then the frequency with which it's likely to happen, and assuming that we've covered enough time that we will have captured those behaviors. And again, we're getting data on a rolling basis, so we can assess that as we go. But what we typically recommend is somewhere around a month if the project can sustain it, because that is still giving you a huge amount of information about digital behaviors, but not such a long time in field that that you really are running out of time and patience for getting those results back. We're generating such a ridiculous amount of data that we can't actually process it without a supercomputer. So.
That's great. Thank you, Katie. We have no further questions from our audience. So as just mentioned before, we'll make the recording available to you, so you can share this recording with your colleagues if you so wish. And if you would like to know more about this specific topic or anything else related to it, please just feel free to get in touch through the usual channels. And with that, thank you again, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
The moderator has ended the conference. Goodbye. Thank you for calling.